Ms. Kuhn, you're going to help us with pages, the K through 12 package, pages 2 through 20.
So I'll start with just page 2. This is your overarching package. The result of taking the higher revenues is that there are higher guarantees under the package. The prior year guarantees up $5 million. The current year is up $172 million. The budget year is up $723 million. In addition, since May revised, the California Department of Ed has found $58 million in additional unspent prior year monies that the conference package recognizes. The key components on a one-time basis is a large augmentation for educator effectiveness and $50 million for the adult education data. On the ongoing side, there's additional augmentations for local control funding formula, after-school programs, foster youth, school transportation, and then you've heard about the preschool and community college augmentations. So that's page 2.
And we'll move on then. So page 3 and 4, that's adult education block grant, trailer bill, and adult education data.
So the compromise here is that there's $500 million for the block grant and $50 million for the data. For the block grant, there's trailer bill language that would cap the maintenance of effort, the hold harmless provision for adult schools at $375 million. The language would clarify that joint powers agencies can be members of adult ed consortia. Part of the agreement is that the role of the executive director of the state board would be reduced, and so the superintendent and the community college chancellor would have the bulk of the authority. There's also an increase in the what's allowable under the new program, where programs for older adults would be deemed allowable. Because there is funding for adult ed data, there'd be trailer bill language directing the chancellor and the superintendent to report back to you on the outcome data that is to be collected under the new program. So those are pages 3 and 4. Page 5 is to recognize that the package includes additional funding for the local control funding formula. Page 6 is to recognize the significant amount, $3.3 billion, that's dedicated for the mandate backlog. There's also trailer bill language you discussed earlier. The compromise is that school districts would still be audited and their mandate claims would still be adjusted, but any money that's gone out to them would not be allowed to be recaptured. Once it's gone out, it's effectively theirs. On page 7, for the educator effectiveness block grant, there's $500 million. $490 million of this is dedicated to teacher and administrator support and professional development, a broad array of activities in those areas. $10 million is earmarked more specifically for professional development in the area of information technology, network management, and internet infrastructure. On page 8, the compromise with CTE is that it would be a competitive grant program. There would be $400 million provided. To ensure that districts, that applicants of all sizes could compete, there would be designations for small, medium, and large applicants. There would also be clarification that priority would be for those applicants who do not currently have CTE programs, serve high proportions of low-income English learner and foster youth students, have a high dropout rate, or are located in areas with high unemployment rates. CD would get some 2 positions and $350,000 to administer the new program. Page 9, the compromise here is to provide $50 million for the broadband infrastructure grants. There would be trailer bill language implementing the $50 million. There would be a cap of $1,000 per test-taking student that could be spent. If an applicant wanted to go above this amount, it would have to get finance approval, and then they would have to notify the JLBC. If there are still funds that remain after all schools are able to administer the online assessments, the residual could go out for those schools that are underconnected, but this again would have to be approved by finance and the JLBC would need to be notified. There's also a requirement that the high-speed network submit a report October 2016 that would itemize the projects that are funded, the costs, and the future needs. Page 10, there's $25 million for home-to-school transportation. A portion of this would go for applying a COLA for all school districts that currently get the home-to-school add-on, and the residual would be for equalization. On page 11, the compromise is to expand the foster youth services program to provide the $25 million augmentation effective September 1 with full year costs of $30 million. The expansion again would be to allow foster youth that are living with relatives to be able to access services. Page 12, the compromise is $25 million for the ACES program. The rate would increase from $7.50 to $8 per student per day. There would not be a local match for the augmentation, and there would be explicit direction that these funds are to supplement, not supplant, the existing funds for the program. Page 13, there is money to go to QAI schools who do not get concentration funding, but it's clear that it's only 1 year. It's a final transition for those school districts. The compromise on page 14 is that there's been some savings from assessment contracts that have been identified, $1.5 million. These could go to fund up to the 6 assessment fellows. There wouldn't be funding for the consortia. On page 15, the compromise is to take trailer bill language that would have additional transparency regarding how districts are using their supplemental and concentration funding. Page 16 is to also have language that would add homeless youth as a pupil subgroup for the purposes of school district accountability. Page 17 is also a compromise. It is providing some funding for the eval for LAUSD related to English learners. There's also some funding issues 16 for student-friendly services, an additional $500,000 one-time money on top of $500,000 ongoing funding. The additional one-time funding is for transitional issues as the program becomes run by a different county, by a county office of education moving forward. And on your last few pages, there's $600,000 that's provided for the kindergarten implementation report. On page 19, the decision was to reject creating a new standards implementation office within the California Department of Education. And on page 20, the conference action before you is to reject the proposal without prejudice. The lawsuit is still in the midst, and there's not, I think folks have deemed it's premature to provide CD with staffing and money at this time.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Kuhn.
So I just wanted to say a few things on the package, and there is a lot of compromise and a lot of common ground in this package. Clearly, the overall funding level continues to be a problem because it's based on the higher LAO revenues that have $3 billion in speculative revenues that we don't think that the state's budget should be based on. Just going through a few of the items that we continue to have concerns with. There's an expansion in the adult education block grant program to expand the uses of those monies to a broader a swath of older adult programs. There was a significant reform to the adult education programs, really to focus on getting adults into good paying jobs, retraining, giving them other skills that are necessary for employment. And we think this, while important programs and programs that may warrant funding in other areas are not appropriate for this block grant, which is really focused on workforce development and getting more people into good paying jobs. So I have so much in common ground that I'm going through the pages. The next issue that we continue to have concerns about is the home to school transportation program, as well as the foster youth services program. These are programs that are old categoricals that we have vastly changed our education financing system with the LCFF, and prefer to put the money in the LCFF as opposed to growing these old categorical programs. Same with the after-school education and safety program, with the emphasis really being on local control and the ability of local school districts to make the best investments for their youth. The transparency language related to the LCAP also continues to be a problem. With LCFF, there is a significant change in focus in terms of the entire system of accountability of school districts. We are still in the very early stages of implementing the new accountability rubric at the State Board of Education. We think this discussion is really premature, and we'd like the opportunity to come back in January with refinements. There's a lot of learning going on about how this accountability process is going to work. And we do think it's a fair conversation to have to refine this proposal, but it's really premature as we continue to implement it at the State Board of Education and at the Department of Education. And that's the last issue that I'm going to highlight.
Okay. Well, thank you. Glad to hear there's so much agreement and so relative little disagreement. Not to go over each of your points, but just to shed a little light on what we're thinking here with regard to a couple of them. With regard to the older Californians and adult ed, that we think our proposal is very much aligned with local control and the philosophy of the LCFF, that this just allows a little bit more flexibility for this grant program so that consortia can weigh in on this. So maybe some districts have an older population and would decide on their own that they want to use some of this for their elderly population, which are not about to enter the workforce or to be supporting children in elementary or secondary education, and others that have a younger population and have workforce needs. So it's about greater local control. And then you're speaking up on behalf of local control with regard to the after-school education and safety program, where we're saying maybe something a little bit different, that this is already an established program. The $7.50 per student or per youth rate has not been touched in nearly 10 years. So this just gives an extra 50 cents. Other states are doing much more than we, and that these afternoon hours are really where our youth can get themselves into trouble, and that if we're not looking at the entire day until parents get home from work, we're really not doing all we can for them. So just a few additional thoughts on some of the points that you had brought up. Assemblywoman, you want to add anything?
I would simply add, I think we've heard from several older adults, and I think if as a state we believe in lifelong learning, to exclude the older adults by limiting what they can do and not the others, I think would be most unfair, and it's truly an opportunity for us to demonstrate to our older Californians that we continue to care about them and their education and their expansion. I think it's very important, if we're talking local control funding formula, as we've talked about for many years, that we continue to push the envelope on accountability, because it's moving rather slowly at the state level, and there are great concerns in the public about what is happening with local control funding formula. If we expect the public to support it and be a part of it, they're going to want to know the information about it. And this piece really is basically sharing the information. Some may call it accountability simply because it's information, but I'm not sure if that's accountability, because accountability talks about responsibility and consequences, not just telling me how much money you spent, but what are the consequences of poorly spending the money. So we really don't have an accountability document. And as we continue to work on local control funding formula, we had initially been assured there'd be accountability, which we have yet to see it. But we do know that the dollars are there. The public wants to know. This is public information that we're putting out there. So it's not like we're doing something beyond what we're supposed to do. We believe in transparency. The money is there. People ask, how much does my district get? Where are they spending it? Who are they spending it on? And that becomes important if we're going to continue to have the public believe that there's some logic behind the funding of the system that we have that sometimes appear to be very complicated. But if it's there and it's put on the website, people can see it. Clearly, the compromise has not put as much information as I would like on the website concerning it, but I recognize how the compromise came into existence and the rationale for it. But I think the more information we give our public about what we do with the money that we're putting out into our schools, the better able our public is to challenge us to either do better or to fund more or to be more engaged themselves in the process of helping our schools be successful. So none of us benefit when folks don't understand what's going on up here. So I just think in terms of that, I want to commend the K-12 folks for really getting involved and digging out some things. The issue of staff development and training and those kinds of things are important, and hopefully that will work in terms of bringing it. There are things here I like, things I'm whatever about, but I think overall the package is a good package.
Thank you, Assemblywoman. Just one other item I want to address, and that would be on page 8, and this is the career technical education. We had very different approaches as we worked toward this compromise, and I think this compromise really strikes a good balance with the competitive grants separated into 3 different sizes based on average daily attendance. We can make sure that all size districts are able to compete and keep it as a competitive grant program as the governor had proposed. So balancing the dual needs of both quality programs as well as the equity issue. So were you good on this?
Yeah.
Is this a sweet spot for you too?
Yes, we are supportive of this component of the compromise.
Glad to hear that. So colleagues, let's see.
We'll take one at a time, how we can do this.
Right. All right, so in the issue of saving a little bit of time, I'm going to suggest that we take 2 different votes on this entire package. And I want to be careful that you understand we're going to address issue numbers, not page numbers. So they're actually quite close. For example, issue 2 is on pages 3 and 4. Issue 4 is on page 6. They're close in numbers. We're dealing with the issues. The first vote will be on issues, and I'll go through this slowly. First vote will be on issues 2, 6, 7, 8, 9, 11, 13, 14, 16, 18, and 19. That will be a first vote on those issues. So on those issues, we would have Senator Nielsen.
But just before the vote, Mr.
Sure.
Chairman, if I may observe something. There are some of these that I'll be voting no on here that, but for the higher revenue expectation, we might be able to work something out, but our major concern in terms of Prop 98 and base building to the future is the obliging of some of the funds that we now have that, may not be available in the future, and we've already built the base. So the higher revenue estimate, if it comes in lower, that is problematic, and we do always have the opportunity here to spend that if we want to. I think many of the items here are a good compromise. Indeed, the career tech education one has been a hard-born compromise, but with the related, the spans, that does help a lot with the competitive grant and balancing that with ADA. And then the serving the disadvantaged, the English learning, foster youth, those are all in the high unemployment areas are particularly important. I may ask one question, if we will, on the homeschool transportation.
Go right ahead.
There used to be provisions for the rural districts that have greater difficulties with weather and with mileage. Are there any special accommodations for those kinds of districts in the homeschool transportation?
We're not aware, at Hanson Department of Finance, we're not aware of any specific provisions for those types of districts.
Well, it's been a long time, I know.
So when the home to school transportation categorical was consolidated into the LCFF, though, it was as an add-on. So the allocation of the monies continued as opposed to running through, were maintained as opposed to running through the LCFF formula where there may have been a redistribution effect.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. So we're clear on the first vote? All right, and then that would be 3-0, 3-0. And then the second vote will be the remaining items, issue items. Issues 1, 3, 4, 5, 10, 12, 15, and 17. That's the second vote. 2-1, 2-1. And that will take care of our Prop 98 package. And colleagues, then we do have issue 1 to deal with, which is conforming to everything we've just voted on, which is the package itself. And I imagine that's 2-1, 2-1. Thank you for reminding me. Committee members, we are almost home. We have a number of individual open items. We're going to start by returning to Human Services. Let's see, what did we do there?
Didn't we do this?
Colleagues, Human Services, page 12, there's a technical correction. It has to do with the date. So the date that we had voted on, page 12, is effective October 1st, 2015. The technical correction is July 1st, 2015. So without objection.
2-1.
Well, first of all, without objection, we'll reopen the vote. Thank you. And then on the change, the original vote was 2-1, 2-1. I imagine even the technical change won't change your vote. So it's still 2-1, 2-1 with the October 1st, change to July 1st, 2015.
And I would just note that this is, the July 1 start date is consistent with the governor's proposal, but the funding source is the only difference. Your proposal is general fund. Our proposal continues to be the revenues from the managed care organization tax.
All right. Thank you for that. So we can then move, let's see, took care of that. Let's return to state administration. There were two open items there on page 3 and page 15. We'll take page 3 first. Thank you. This was an Assembly proposal. I'm going to pass the mic to Assemblywoman Weber.
Yes, I move the approval of this. This was a proposal to deal with an anti-human trafficking program, recognizing that we've done a number of things over the years to assist with that, but one of the real gaps that lies is basically programs that deal with shelter and those kinds of things. And so this is $10 million. We talked about it before, that will come out of the restitution fund, and I move approval.
2-1.
2-1 on the Senate side, Assembly side, 2-1 on the Senate. Thank you.
So the motion on page 3 is for the Assembly version. This is 10 million restitution fund.
We voted.
2-1.
2-1.
2-1. I pass the mic. And then our last issue in state administration is on page 15. And we've reached a compromise on the seismic safety retrofit programs. The Assembly had originally adopted a tax credit for seismic retrofit programs totaling $15 million annually for 5 years. Additionally, $12 million would be attributable to the income taxes and administered by the Franchise Tax Board, $3 million administered by the Department of Insurance. The compromise is that we just deal with the $3 million for each of 2 years for the program administered by the Department of Insurance and OES. Leaving aside the tax credit.
Leaving aside the tax credit. I just want to say we appreciate the Senate's willingness to work on this, and as well as the others. I know it's kind of a stretch, but and we're willing to accept the compromise of just funding the brace and bolts. But wanted to let everyone know that the members of the Assembly are still very committed to this tax credit piece. They think it will be important in dealing with what we consider many of the soft buildings in the state that are affordable units. It can easily cost, obviously, a lot more if we were to suffer some kind of seismic event in the state. So it's still a growing concern. We recognize the need to be fiscally forward-thinking in terms of making sure that the revenues are solid in out years before we undertake such an effort to talk about a tax credit, knowing that this tax credit was going to be delayed. So we will continue to work on this. This is still very important. It's not an unimportant item, not only for the Assembly, but we think for the state in terms of securing the providing safety for those that are there. So we accept the compromise of dealing only with the brace and bolts for the next 2 years. So I move the approval of the compromise.
Thank you, Assemblywoman. So we do have a motion for the compromise.
3-0.
3-0, 3-0, and recognizing that there is yet